welcome to those of us who are in person and to those who are joining virtually. We are at the Freiburg New Church Assembly on Saturday, August 2nd, 225. I'm Gard Perry. Our theme this week is God's promises, their sequence in the biblical narrative and significance for our spiritual journey. And my title is The Call of Abram, which might rightly be called the week's sub-theme or secondary theme, for one of our presenters, the Reverend Sage Cole, spoke on this, focusing on it in her first lecture this week. And I am speaking on it. There's only 7 of them, and 2 of us are speaking about one. And this is the covenant for which George Dole quoted in full. And it's the only covenant, the call of Abram, I should say, that he did in his book, The Promised Kingdom, a biblical image of our personal growth, because he writes, this is the mainspring of the plot of the whole Bible. So in this talk, I will observe that the call comes to Abram, and we're calling that a promise, and we're saying that's equivalent to or identical with a covenant. But the covenant goes to Abram and Sarai. They are both equal partners in this, Abram as much as Sarai and Sarai as much as Abram. And we'll touch on that in my talk. And so this morning, I'm going to set this story in work I've done over the past 2.5 decades, in which I've attempted to bring Swedenborg's treatment of the glorification within reach of our understanding. I wish to share the result. Now, to do so, I will remind myself and of you of the difficulty of reading the available translations about the glorification. I'll touch on a method developed by George Dole to translate Swedenborg's writing into lived experience, which I'll utilize. And at the end, I'm going to read a total of, sounds like a lot, but just 15 section numbers with the result. It'll be the glorification as the lived experience of the historical Jesus. Now here I pause. I begin with a pattern I've noticed. It's an interpersonal pattern, by the way. I'll indicate that it's relevant in just a moment. It's one of those things that I heard this week by Chuck Blair. We were so gifted to have him here. He said there are some things in life that are tensions that ought to be managed, not problems that can be solved. And my problem is that I have these lovely, lovely people in my life, not a lot, a few, where it's a precious connection, just a real heartfelt internal connection that just happens to be there. They're people I know, and they're very sensitive, and I have this pattern where I'll feel this connection. Oh man, there it is, I'm so happy. And then I'll say something or I'll do something that wrecks it. And I go, oh, why did I say that? And now I'm sad. And however, the pattern is such that it always comes back. I just have to wait and be patient. And sometimes I just wish, well, why can't I just go, well, for example, just go up to a precious person and say, have I told you lately how much I appreciate you? Just look them in the eye and say, thank you. Then the connection would always be there. Do I remember to do that? No. I'm not going to talk about that more, but I'm going to talk about an idea that's going to come up in the lecture with which I have the same kind of relationship. It's a precious idea in Swedenborg, and I say, oh, there it is. I think I get it. And then it disappears. And I go, oh, well, I'm going to try again. And this idea, I'm kind of warning you, I have discovered that this idea is one that I really like, and I've come to believe it's just too difficult to understand. And that idea is the glorification, as Swedenborg has written about it in the Arcana, short for Arcana Celestia, aka Secrets of Heaven. So I found this place in Swedenborg where he says, well, and this is going to come up again in the lecture, but I tell you, this was so difficult for me to write, it's even going to be difficult for me to say. I'm figuring it's going to be difficult for you to hear it, so I'm going to say it right now as best I can, and then I'll go, and here it comes again. So that idea is that the glorification is something we can see as an image of our regeneration. All right? The glorification is something we can see as an image of our regeneration, albeit remotely, he writes. Okay, I tried that, thinking I would find an image of what might be something like regeneration, and there it was. I saw it, an image, and then it disappeared, just like my interpersonal relations where a precious feeling will be there and then it disappears. And this time it's not my fault. I think the idea is simply too difficult. Now I'll welcome your comments on this when that time comes. So what I did instead, I followed along with George Dole's career, of course, quite closely. He ran into the same problem with a much simpler text that was not difficult. And that text is New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine, heavenly teaching. Section number 11, where Swedenborg writes, there's nothing more important in the whole world than to know what is good and what is true. Full stop. Well, that's simple. We're going to get to one much more difficult. So George said, okay, what's good and what's true? And he searched around a little bit, asked a few people, found out there was no general consensus, and he didn't even know for himself what he would say. So he made a decision. Good is going to be caring about you. True is going to be wanting to understand you. And he said, I'm going to practice that in my conversations with people. And that's the marriage of good and truth, and it came into his lived experience, and he was living it. And he concluded his paper in which he introduced that idea. Is that, my friends, is how I have come to understand the connection between doctrines and life, and in particular, the doctrines and my life. End quote, George Dole. Okay, there, I've said it. And the solution I found, now the other one is very difficult though. The glorification, and which you will hear in a moment, unbelievable. Who can understand that? I've tried, and I've failed. So borrowing a page from George, I decided to try something, which is the result you're going to hear this morning. I'll substitute what I understand to be the lived experience of the historical Jesus. And for the blanks of celestial, spiritual, and natural, about which you're going to hear in just a moment, I'll substitute his lived experience. And for celestial, be his love for the whole human race. For spiritual, it's going to be his seeing their inner states. And for natural, it's going to be the effective teachings, his teachings on those who followed him. You'll hear that in a moment. That, my friends, is my introduction to help both me and you follow along when I get to that part. And I'll go, cue the lens through which we see the glorification. It's coming. I begin with a prologue. In my mind's eye, I see that I have come upon a learned person who was familiar with the history of ideas and knew about Emanuel Swedenborg. I was in a foreign country at the time, but he spoke English quite nicely, and he found out that not only was he very familiar with the history of ideas and Emanuel Swedenborg's prominent place within it, but he discovered I was a Swedenborgian. So to while away a short amount of time, he said, oh, I am aware that Swedenborg looms large in the pantheon of great thinkers and that he authored a large number of important texts. Would you remind me, what is it that he wrote? Well, we had a little bit of time, so I decided just to list off a kind of spin-off titles as I could think of them in order of their publication, beginning with the Arcana Celestia. I won't do the dates, but that one's 1749 to 1756, just to locate the thing, which was followed by Heaven and Hell, then 5 shorter works, including New Jerusalem and its heavenly teaching. Then he spent quite a bit of time on the Apocalypse Explained, not published in his lifetime, followed by 4 more shorter works, including the 4 Doctrines, by the way. Then big ones, Divine Love and Wisdom, Divine Providence, Apocalypse Revealed, Soul-Body Interaction, True Christian Religion was the last one I reel off. Well, he seemed quite happy with this, and then he said, well, which of the texts is the one that you like the best? Which one do you use? And I said, well, I turn to New Jerusalem and Heavenly Teaching because it's such a handy text. It tells about how to be human and saves all the difficult stuff to the end. And it's a short work. I could carry it around in my pocket, but the Arcana, short for the Arcana Celestia, that's his magnum opus. That's the one I turn to when I do the work I'm involved in. And what's the book about, the Arcana, he asks. Oh, why? The Arcana, I reply, is Swedenborg's treatment of the literal sense of the Bible. He says there's an inner meaning, and that the story is about our regeneration. The 7 days of creation, after all, are not about the literal creation of the physical universe, Swedenborg reminds us. They are 7 stages of the new creation of being human, of a human being. The Bible, I conclude, is about our inner life. At that point, my interlocutor was interested and wanted to talk further, but we happened to be on a train platform and his train came in. And so we parted ways. Now, turning to the room, I would say pretty much the same thing. The Arcana tells the story of the inner sense of the meaning in Genesis and Exodus, and it's about our regeneration. That had almost become automatic for me until I began to take a closer look at what Swedenborg actually does when the historical part of the Bible at Genesis 12, which is where the call of Abram comes, and that's the mainspring of the whole plot for the whole Bible, until I took a more close look at, well, what does Swedenborg actually do? There, my friends, I find that Swedenborg seems to say about our regeneration, well, yes, but not quite. You see, the purpose of our learning about our regeneration, Emanuel Swedenborg seems to say, is so that we can see it as an image of the Lord's glorification, albeit remotely, as through a lens. Cue the lens. Okay, as I said at the beginning, I've tried it. I can't do it. Either, I just found it, I've tried it, I've failed so many times. I said, this can't be. I love the idea. It's like a precious relationship. I can almost see it, but then it goes away. So, well, it was 2.5 decades ago. I did try to do something about it following George's cue. What if, reverse this? Instead of trying to see the glorification as an image through the lens of one's own regeneration, it's even hard to say. You might be saying to yourself, what did he just say? I've had that thought many times. What did I just say? Instead of that, what if someone, I, were able to paint a portrait, create an image of the Lord's life while he lived in the world as a concrete, lived image, as a real person going through some inner things, as his lived experience. So this is, what if the glorification could be seen as the lived experience of the historical Jesus, and then we'll tell that story. And that reverses it. Then I would maybe be able to see regeneration as an image of the Lord's glorification as he lived it, following the Lord literally. So, my friends, I'm going to do this with you. And if you'd be so kind, this is a kind of a new work, and it needs some feedback in order, not criticism, please, but some kind of question and answer, anything you want after the discussion period, because you'll be helping the cause by establishing that this is something and how it works, a method for interpreting the glorification to see our regeneration as an image of that. Needs to be established as a method and needs to be demonstrated as how it works. And I begin now with another difficulty. It's quite simple. It's what did Swedenborg write, or more correctly, what did his translators write as the translation of his Latin about the glorification? And if you find this difficult, I join you. I'm going to read 3 paragraphs, standard edition. This is the beginning of the story of the call of Abram, by the way. It's Genesis 12, chapter 1. It's our theme, is the covenant. It's the only one that George actually spelled out. And Swedenborg writes, this verse and those that follow represent and signify the Lord's first instruction. Abram represents the Lord and Sarai represents intellectual truth. Egypt is memory knowledges, and their journey to Egypt represents the Lord's progress even to celestial truths, all according to divine order. Bear with me, I'm going to read 2 more paragraphs of this. And Jehovah said to Abram, get thee out of thy land and from thy birth and from thy father's house to the land that I will cause you to see. These things and those that follow occurred historically, but they are representative, and every word is significative. By Abram is meant the Lord, by Jehovah is signified as first mental advertence of all. Remember that phrase. Get thee out of thy land signifies the corporeal and worldly things from which he was to recede, and from thy birth the more external, and from the father's house the more internal of such things. Into the land to which I will cause thee to see are the celestial and spiritual things which are going to come into view. Now, one time I stopped there and I said, okay, I think I get that. I can figure that out. Corporeal, I can sort of make that one work. Worldly, yeah, a little bit there, but celestial, spiritual, I could at least make a good guess. But then I got to this paragraph. This one is about the change of Jacob's name to Israel. And your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel, signifies the divine celestial of the spiritual. Thus the celestial spiritual, which is in the natural. The celestial itself is the rational, signified by Joseph. And the whole thing fell apart. If you are going to sleep, I do not blame you. I'm not going to... Okay, so I decided I'm not living with this. I'm going to utilize George's method. I'm going to supply what I understand, and historians have now determined that there is a plausible construction of an image or a portrait of the historical Jesus. And when I utilize that portrait and I imagine what his inner life might be based on the people with whom he encountered, what Swedenborg writes about the glorification, and then just kind of substitute that into the inner life. I am about to read those same paragraphs in translation into readable English, I hope, and where it comes up, it'll be the Lord's inner life as lived experience, and this is an identical section number to the one I first read of the 3. Abram is Jesus of Nazareth, pure love. Sarai, his wife, his awareness of that love. As a sister, its awareness itself, and Egypt is Jesus of Nazareth's skillful engagement with his sacred texts. This portion of the biblical narrative is about the first moment of his inner journey, from his first attempt to read more deeply into his sacred text to an illuminated love for the whole human race. It is about how Jesus of Nazareth united the divinity within him to his own humanity to become God, all according to divine order. Okay, I pause. Still difficult, but nonetheless brings Swedenborg text closer to our understanding. Here are section numbers, portions thereof, from 1401 to 1425. It's a little less than 15 of them. They go by kind of quick. So here they are in lived experience. First, Swedenborg's general introduction. From the mere letter of the Word, the Old Testament, no one would ever suspect that this part of the Bible contains deep secrets of heaven, and that every word has regard to the whole human race and to every individual in it. For what follows bears witness to the inner life of Jesus while he lived in the world. It bears witness to what genuine human community looks like, how to live a good life on earth, and what eternal life in heaven is all about. Swedenborg continues, while the mind is drawn to the literal sense alone, one can only imagine that the first chapters of Genesis are about the creation of the world. The Garden of Eden about paradise, Adam, the first created man, and the call of Abram as the beginning of the historical drama, history. Who can imagine anything else? Nonetheless, this part of the Bible contains arcana, which are deeply hidden things, which have never before been revealed, writes Swedenborg, in 1749. And in fact, the first chapter of Genesis is, in the internal sense, is about the new creation of human beings, which is our regeneration, and in such a way that there is not one word that does not portray, point out, or unfold such things. And now, on to the glorification in the lived experience of the historical Jesus. Now the word of the Lord said to Abram, quote, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you." This verse and those that follow comprise ancient history. Yes, however, the account is now symbolic. Every word suggests developments in the inner life of Jesus of Nazareth. Here we see his heart open for the first time to a vast love for the whole human race. The immediate consequence of this was his need to withdraw attention from his religious practices of his community, to step back from the social standing he enjoyed as the result of his achievements. He was also to let go of the pleasure, the satisfaction that accompanied his involvement with those practices. For he was going to need all his physical and mental powers to face what was now happening. Jesus of Nazareth was about to witness an infinite expansion of his love for all human beings, limitless insight into their inner states, and knowledge of their need for salvation. Jehovah said to Abram means that it was God who opened Jesus' heart, and it was divinity itself that filled it. Jesus was filled with the love of God, his mind filled with knowledge of God, and he knew that it was so. Get thee out of thy land means that he needed to withdraw his attention from those religious rituals, step back from his social standing. He was to let go of the pleasure and satisfaction that followed his ritual practices of what was called at the time the holiness code, how to stay pure and purity so you could give sacrifices to the temple. He stepped back from all of that. And I will make thee a great nation. Jesus saw that the realm in heaven and on earth is grounded in love that is limitless. That realm was to become increasingly fruitful with more and more people in it. Jesus saw that his name was to become widely known and that his life would be decisive within the realm of love that was coming into the world. And I will make thy name great is about Jesus' inner life. For the love in his heart was going to expand to embrace the whole human race, whereupon he strove not to be the greatest, but to be the least, serving all, as Jesus would know, later recorded in Matthew, by the way. It shall not be so among you, but whosoever would be great among you shall be your minister. Whosoever shall be first among you shall be your servant. For even as the Son of God came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life for many. And thou shalt be a blessing means that the life of Jesus of Nazareth would be decisive for all of humanity. It was going to pave the way for other people to embark on a similar journey at their own level. The blessings of divine love and wisdom would flow into the hearts and minds of people for the first time in that way. And I will bless those who bless you. All who recognized and who accepted his love would know genuine happiness, while all who failed to do so would find only heartache. Every moment of divine love, every single instance of seeing others clearly, originated in the love that Jesus of Nazareth was now bringing into the world, was then at that time bringing into the world. And Abram went as Jehovah spoke to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was the son of 75 years, a son of 75 years when he went forth out of Haran. And this last paragraph in this section reads, though the experience was over in a moment, and he was still quite young, Jesus began his inward journey. He had acquired genuine love and a capacity to see deeply into the nature of all things. He brought with him a relatively simple idea about God and how to love others, ideas that were nonetheless alive for him. So it was that Jesus began his journey toward the vast realm of love and soon found himself at the very heart of it. I'm just going to shift. We could almost end there. He's found himself at the very heart of it. And this, by the way, begins the contemplative form and period of Jesus' life. He withdrew from public life. And as I would say elsewhere, he withdrew from his practices of the what were called the commands of the law of Moses. Those are all the commands in the first 5 books of Moses. He withdrew from his practice of those, which was his daily ritual, for he was, as I imagine this portrait, a student in the synagogue in Nazareth, and there was an elder who taught. And Jesus was a devoted student. No idea that this was going to happen, by the way. Complete surprise. His inner life just blossomed one day, and then this is how it's portrayed. So he withdrew, not because the practices were misguided, but because he needed his attention on his inner life. And I now go to this one next section. This is the story of why did Abram and Sarai have to go to Egypt and flee? Because there was a famine in the land. Well, this happens right after the call. They get into the land, and the first thing they do is they leave. And here's why. And I'll just read 2 paragraphs. And then we're going to get into our discussion time. And so, just a few verses later, and there was a famine in the land, and Abram and Sarai went down into Egypt to sojourn there, because the famine was grievous in the land. There was a famine in the land. Oh boy. Okay. There was a famine in the land means that Jesus' experience of his second infancy, for this is what happened, he became like a little child once his inner heart opened for the first time, just like a baby. That's why he had to withdraw, to protect this new feeling from the harsh world in which he lived. And that's why the flee to Egypt signifies there was a famine in the land, meaning there was no support for what he was now experiencing internally. He had no knowledge of, what do I do now? That was his first thought. What do I do? Scarcity. He had no knowledge. That's the famine, by the way. Jesus' experience of his second infancy was new to him. He lacked the knowledge he needed to interpret his experience. He turned to his sacred text to pore over them, to find knowledge about meditation, contemplation, and prayer, and realized how little he knew of these practices. Last paragraph. There was a famine in the land is an ancient way, Swedenborg tells us, of speaking about the inner life of Jesus and the potential for his inner development. When Jesus was still young, just beginning to become aware of the divine and human process that had opened within his inner life, he knew little about what was happening. He realized he would need to learn about the dynamics of this transformative process. In the course of time, Jesus would learn that knowledge was not going to arise spontaneously from within him, but that it would be reflected in what he saw and heard in the world around him, and in particular in the sacred text that he was studying. As we shall see shortly, Jesus' worldview was derived from what he found in the literal sense of Scripture. It was his sacred text. So he began to memorize long sections of the biblical narrative from which he derived insights about his own interior life. Swedenborg is very explicit that the literal sense of the Scripture is symbolic about, of course we've always known, about our own inner life. So the texts he had been studying, he was now studying for knowledge as to how to interpret this brand new experience of his second birth. Okay. His inmost self illuminated the conceptual knowledge he gained, giving his reading of the biblical knowledge and biblical narrative an inner arc of meaning. In a word, insights about how he was to live his life now were grounded in portions of the Scripture, which were brought to life from the depths of his inmost self. Given that Jesus was brought into this world just as we are, his learning process and ours is similar, though with a vast difference, that his inmost self was pure love itself. This difference provided unlimited potential to open the content of his consciousness. In fact, elements of his memory, his insight, and thought process were all going to be informed by divinity, eventually becoming divine. My friends, I have brought to you a problem and a solution. Problem was I fell in love with an idea. First I tried to get it. I couldn't see the glorification through the lens of one's regeneration. Wasn't going to happen. Then I tried to read the text as the translators had read it. That got worse. Then I saddled myself up next George. Then wait a minute, what's the word? Saddled up next to George Dole and said, George, I understand you've solved a problem with good and truth. How about helping me solve a problem understanding the glorification? And he said, well, why don't you just substitute the Lord's lived experience as the historical Jesus, kind of do a little research, and then look at the text and then plug in the answers. And I'll conclude with this. How about for celestial, which who knows what that means, pure, how about love for the whole human race? That's what Swedenborg says. What about spiritual? How about unlimited insight into the inner lives of all human beings? God can do that. He was becoming God. This part was God, by the way, his innermost God. His innermost life was God, not the rest of him. That took his whole 18 years before he began his ministry. Well, what about natural? Well, that really is an interpersonal word. That's about a word of collective. The natural is the people. So the transformation of the natural level of the Lord's life was his teaching other people and their transformation. They're becoming a loving community for the first time. Love to the neighbor became the ethic, not sacrifice at the temple alone. He didn't say don't sacrifice at the temple, by the way. So with that, I'm going to segue into discussion. Don't get nervous by saying that my interlocutor in real life on this subject has been, wait for it, Roz Taylor. Roz wasn't expecting this. Roz, why don't you start us off by, I'm going to ask you a question. Yes, thank you. David Keating is, for those online and those in the room, we're going to start now with some questions, answers, concerns, any clarification, wonderment. And Roz, you've worked with this. I actually gave you some text to read. Any response that you found either helpful or problematic you'd like to raise for my consideration and let other people in the room warm up to their question? If not, you can say, no, Gard, and I was not prepared for this.
Gard, I was not prepared for this, but I, of course, have a few thoughts straight away. And one is, I guess I had always drawn from Swedenborg that our regeneration is an image of the glorification, that the glorification is like the super experience, or was, and our experience mirrors that in the same way that humans are an image and likeness of God. Our regeneration is an image and likeness of the divine glorification. I will add, which I told you before, when I took a glorification class in my theological training in Australia, I said to David Miller, oh, I'm so excited to be taking this class because I don't understand the glorification. And is this being magnified at all? Oh, okay. No, I don't understand the glorification. And now I'm finally going to get all the answers in a 3-month course. I'm so excited. And he said, yeah, well, not really. We're going to look at individual human transformation and infer what we can, which I came away very unsatisfied. But I've been very gratified to have been on this journey with you for the last little bit, to finally get an understanding through the lens of the historical Jesus and what he was likely going through and the places in his life where it could have been happening, because I'd always sort of grown up with the thinking that somehow as a newborn he was having these incredible insights, and that anyway, to have it reframed as it's a second birth. Yeah. Anyway, so that's off the top of my head.
So I'm going to rephrase some of what I heard Roz say, and I'll be welcoming other hands in just a moment. We have about 10 minutes. I have, in previous conversations, I think Roz just said, and you can correct me, that I've always thought that, kind of like what I always thought, the regeneration is at our level. Glorification is the Lord's level, and somehow one is in the image of another. But if I heard you, but the connections always remained rather vague. And what the glorification is frankly incomprehensible if you keep reading those paragraphs in the way the Standard Edition was. I defy you to tell me what they mean. So I hope nobody's terribly stunned and they can't just even raise their hand. Julie?
I think it's time I go back and read all the writings again. I never caught any of
Speak up a
that.
little bit. We're not
can you hear
mic'd in here, or that's for the other people, so go ahead and speak up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I read the writings when I was in college because I used to take a train back and forth. And I thought I had it all together. But this is something I never saw. I guess I've got to read again. Thank you.
Okay.
It was wonderful.
Kevin is raising his hand. And while Kevin is getting the mic, I'm just going to interpret the this that you just said. Okay, Kevin, just give me one moment on that. But this is something I never saw. and I'll just answer that. I'll say what the this is from my point of view. And I like a shake of the head, yes or no. This is the first time that the glorification has been presented as the historical Jesus's second birth as an adult, when he was born again. And the infancy that's referred to in the Arcana is his second infancy. Childhood is his second childhood. He's an adult. That's what's new, and maybe this is the this that you just referred to. Amen. Kevin.
I was wondering, because I always like to be the wet blanket on everything. So
Please don't.
No. What I mean by, I always bring it to a dark place. You
Please don't.
trust me on this. It's going to be okay.
Oh, good.
When talking about the famine in the land and the Lord retreating into these emotions of love for all of humanity, I'm wondering if you could comment at all about the notion of temptation and struggle, of taking the temptations of the equitable amount on the other side.
Right.
And because it wasn't really mentioned in any of the things you say, but the power of the temptation. So I say the dark side.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I don't mean anything negative about what you're saying. I'm saying there's an element of he's experiencing all these great thoughts, but he's also taking upon himself an assault of the hells at the same time.
Okay, so that is Kevin, thank you very much. That's a wonderful question. So Kevin referred to something that I believe many of us are familiar with. And these are phrases like grievous temptation, assault from the hells. And then in the biblical narrative, it gets terribly difficult. He's in great pain. He's anguished. This is all going on in his adult life after this experience. Now, Kevin just asked me, well, what about that side of it in the story that Kevin, have just heard? And the way I'm finding this to be the case, that's later. There's nothing of that. He is a baby internally. Jesus of Nazareth would look just like he did before. He's about 18 years old. He's a strapping, strong, very bright, capable, right embedded within his community. Nothing changed. Say this happened that I just read. All of that happened in a moment. If he walked out of the synagogue back toward his living quarters, no one would know the difference, and he would not himself have really understood what had happened. He would not be tempted. There would be no pressure, nothing external jeopardizing this. It's all protection. The journey it would be like holding an infant and walking with an infant. You would be the one to be carefully walking and holding the infant. Well, everything in his life was his carefully walking to hold the infant in he's now a reborn baby now, internally. That's his life now, so he's protecting that. That's all he has to do. The question then becomes, well, when did the severe trials come? Well, that's really not portrayed until the sacrifice of Isaac, later in the story. And that's when, and George Dole would say something like this, that's when all hell broke loose. And it did. And I do have text about that. It is anguishing to read it. And we're nowhere near that right now. We're just talking about the life of a beautiful little infant, second birth. So thank you. We have 5 minutes. Okay, thank you, David. That will be...
Well, just a hand. We're good. Thank you.
There we go.
Denise. Gard, you're brilliant. It's like you're running so fast, I'm trying to keep up because you have so much to say and so little time to say it. And toward the end of your 20 minutes, let's say, you read a lot. Was that mostly your speculation or straight from Swedenborg?
Okay. Okay, I'm so happy you asked that. That's a method. This is not speculation. This is a method that has 3 steps. I don't have time to go through them. It's a substitution process. So that was Swedenborg's text, sentence by sentence. Instead of reading words like cognitions, memory, knowledges, spiritual of the celestial in the natural, okay, I read those, but I substituted lived experience of an inferred, and this is where you're close to speculation. What historians have done, they've done enough research through archaeology, cross-cultural studies, and text analysis to recreate or reconstruct a plausible portrait of who Jesus was, and even what he thought and said, and who he interacted with. I take that plausible portrait, which I learned, and then I look at the text. If the word celestial, spiritual of the natural is in there, I'm going to translate it right now. I can't just do one tiny sentence. I have to put it in context. So Jesus is talking to his disciples, or people. That's the natural. Interpersonal relations is his natural. It's not his physical body. It's his way of understanding others. So that's the natural. Mm-hmm. The celestial of the spiritual is, okay, he is feeling a deep love for his seeing their inner lives and his knowing what to say to help them. That's the celestial of the spiritual and the natural. Mm. Voila. Okay, we have time for one more. Yeah, it's exactly 10 of. Hugh, would you like the last word?
Yeah, I would look at it differently. I would start out with the literal translations and see what they define themselves as and work from there, and then trying to relate them to my own experience, but I would be hesitant to put them into my own experience before I'd seen what the text was describing itself as.
Hugh, you and I agree. That's exactly what I did. I start with the text. And with that, I thank you. I thank everyone for being here, please. And it's time to go.
Thank you.